morning, ladies. So good to have you all with me today. Of course, my sidekick in life and ministry and business every way, my lovely wife, Tammy. And today we are blessed to have Shelley Henderson join us at the table. Shelley is a longtime educator in Dinuba and retired. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what you did at the high school for all those years?
Yeah, I was at Dinuba High for 22 years, 18 of those as the activities director and leadership teacher, and then taught some business courses beyond that. But just the most fulfilling probably time of my life to be able to touch students. In fact, I had all three of your sons in my leadership classes through the years.
And we'll pray for you, Shelley.
And what a blessing that
A little late now, right?
But really, that's a cool thing, though.
It is so cool.
When all three of your sons, especially, our span,
right.
The three of them over 9 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
And for you to have had all three of them was really a blessing to us.
Yes. And so being able to orchestrate the activities of the high school and through the community service at different schools and city events, and to teach kids the value of servant leadership and just to stretch them and help them grow. And it's just an amazing time in my life.
So then after you retired, you decided, I'm too young to retire.
And after 12-hour days all the time at the high school, I just absolutely could not sit around home. So my husband and I opened up Sweet Destination in Reedley, a candy and toy shop, and it allowed us to minister through a business, and we just had so much fun being in a fun shop like that that was made for families, a safe, wholesome place, and just a place to hear people's stories.
Yeah, awesome. And then you ended up selling that business. You had a couple of health issues, and thank God you're out of the woods on all of that. But then you sold the business. And so what are you doing these days?
So now I'm editing your book. I'm not done with that. And just spending a little more time traveling and spending time with family and grandkids. And I'm volunteering at a shop downtown Reedley 1 day a week just to dabble still in seeing people and visiting and just being part of downtown Reedley in that capacity.
It's hard not to once it's in your blood, and I can't imagine retiring from ministry. It just it's just such a part of our lives. I think as long as I'm breathing, I'll be doing some sort of ministry. I may not always pastor a church in my older age, but I'm gonna be doing something for sure. So very good, very good. Well,
short. You gotta you gotta pack in every day if you can.
Well, you guys, today we wanted to kind of chat a little bit about my new book that just is coming out now, and it's called I'm Not Done, and it's my first endeavor in writing. So God bless you, Shelley, because you had the difficult task of editing our first edit and major edit on the book, and then subsequently came back with further editing and helped us really all the way through the process. So I wanted to first of all say thank you.
You're welcome.
So very much.
Yes.
And
hours and hours and hours.
It was a lot. And so, yeah, I'm not done. Just for the case of those that may be listening or watching and aren't aware, back in 2020, I contracted COVID and got the virus. We both did. And I ended up not only in the hospital, but unfortunately on the ventilator for 14 days and in the hospital for 28 days. And basically the short of it is that the doctors had called you and the boys because nobody could come in. And in those days, you couldn't come and visit anybody in the hospital because of all the restrictions. And so that was in itself tormenting and very difficult, to say the least. And all of that is in my book, our book, I say, because you're such a part of this all the way through from step one to now. And this is our journey together.
Yeah.
And so I'm Not Done is all about how the doctors said no hope. And in fact, the subtitle says, when there is no hope, but God says live.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. And we had an army of about 20,000 people that were praying. And that's a whole story. It's part of the book. And the prayers, the Bible says the effectual and fervent prayer of the righteous makes the difference. And I believe that was the turning point and the absolute thing that brought forth the miracle. And when your doctor sits on your bed, the foot of your bed, holds your hands, cries with you, and says, Mark Wallace, you are an absolute miracle. I have no explanation for this. You're the first and only one that's gone home. And all over the news, everything, it was overwhelming during that time. But I think after that, I really began to feel like I knew from the beginning God had spared me for something and that this was huge. But the further I got along with it, the more I began to realize this is a story that I just had to tell.
Absolutely.
And I'd never written, so here it is. Here it is.
Well, when you asked me to edit, I thought, well, that sounds like fun.
I don't know if that's how I'd describe it
I
now.
think you gave me one. I think you gave me. Can you proof this and get it back to me? I forget if it was 1 or 2 weeks. Can you get it back to me? And well, it ended up being more like 3 months of total edits. It took all of us a lot of time to reword, move things around to flow a little better, and get verb and subject agreement and all those things. Should this be in italics or should it be in quotes?
A lot of research.
And choosing the perfect word could take up to half an hour. You know, what do you want the reader to feel here when they read this sentence? And so, I mean, we belabored over every sentence in this book. And then I think we took it in chunks of like 2 to 3 chapters at a time. And then we'd get together and go over all the red edits and the arrows and things to decide, what is it you really want to say? How do you want to say it? And then we go get the next couple chapters and then meet up again. And this was just over and over and over again at different locations around our kitchen table or here at the church. But
out on the patio.
On the patio, little by little by little.
Yep.
We got through it, the first edit, and it was about 100 hours, more than I had anticipated.
Yes.
But
I'm so sorry.
But I want to tell you, and the first time I couldn't enjoy the book.
Yeah.
I was looking for grammar and punctuation and
you only had to look a
and,
couple of words ahead to find
and so it was very belabored reading the first time through, even though it was like, oh man, I wish I could just sit down and read this straight through. And then the second time we went through the edit after you'd made all the corrections, much better. That was only about 30 hours. And Melissa did a second read through. Melissa
Vega.
You'd asked Melissa Vega to do a second read through after my first read through.
Yes, that's right.
And so she found things in addition and had other suggestions. And so then you fixed all that.
And then we had Hambleton do a quick run through of the book, and she found a few things, and every person really had great contribution to it. And we didn't take every edit that someone suggested, but we took the lion's share of it, and it was just so good to gain that many different perspectives. And I think the thing for me was I knew I needed it for grammar. I get it. I knew that was going to be an issue, but I really wanted different perspectives so that when a reader reads the book, they are they're getting it, and they don't have to try to figure out what I was trying to say there.
Exactly. And so everyone's going to have their own opinion
Sure.
as to how it should read. So the more eyes, the better, really.
And I think with something that was interesting to me in the edits was when Mark would write something, it's according to how, he knew what he was trying to say.
Exactly.
But would that same way that he's saying it translate to the reader that way?
Someone who
And it was-
wasn't there.
Yes, who
or
wasn't
hadn't heard
there,
the
had no idea.
story.
Yes, because there were a lot of details that nobody really knew. We kept everything. Well, for one thing, I was so sick myself that, I didn't talk to a lot of people, you know what I mean? And there wasn't a lot of details out there for everyone. So when he wrote it, I knew what he was saying. But to be honest with you, I remember the first time he wanted me to look through it before we gave it to you. Because he was like, oh, I'm not good at grammar stuff. Can you please look through this? It was very difficult for me to read it. Having lived it, I felt like I was reliving it all over again.
Right.
And it was very emotional. So when you say that you were trying to, edit, but you just wanted to read.
I just wanted to read it.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was kind of like that for me too. Only I, to be honest with you, didn't want to read it because it was too real. It's too real. I, still live that, right? So when I would go through that, I know that I knew there were things that I would ask him, what exactly are you trying to say right here? Because I'm not certain the way that it's worded. And I know you came back with things as well, which was so helpful because seeing it through the eyes of the reader, right, became really, really helpful to us. So he was able to reword some things or to say, there were times, honestly, that one of you guys, between the three of you, you and Melissa and Bet, between you guys, there would be edits that you guys would have reworded something different. And we looked at it and we're like, that's not, that wasn't the emphasis.
Yes.
Which really,
Which
Yes.
was good
Yeah.
because it let us know when readers are reading this,
That's
they're
where
not
their mind
understanding
would-
the emphasis.
yes,
Yeah.
So it allowed us
Yes.
to reword and do some things, and that was so incredibly helpful.
Right, right. Things I would refer to that were so vague, but in my mind
or
while I'm
sometimes
writing,
overly pointed.
right, right,
Sometimes it was, too much as well,
right,
which took somebody over here instead of staying
Yes.
Right.
here. So
Yes.
it went both ways, and the edits were just so incredibly helpful.
very important,
Yeah.
vital. It takes me to, and maybe we can drill down a little bit more on this. I had no idea. I just knew I had a story that I felt like needed to be told. I had never written before, and actually, there's a little bit of a story behind that, but I won't go into that. But there were some things that happened years ago that made me think, I know I've got stuff in me to write, but I'm scared. And I didn't have the confidence. And I think the thing that I'm Not Done has helped me with is the fact that now I think I'm a little more confident. I understand the process a lot better. And I believe there's some other stories in me and some other things, some other information that's valuable to people, and that I really want to do some more writing. But I would just say to those that are out there that maybe they have been afraid to try it. I mean, it's like, you got to try.
Absolutely.
And I had all these things over the years that I wanted to write about. And I thought, man, our life is a story that is mind-boggling.
We have a journey.
Yeah, but this was so present, so real, so overwhelming that when I started writing, I just wanted to get it out and get it out there on paper.
I think it's important that it got out that quickly, though,
Yes.
because when it's illness related, things like that, I think we can tend to lose details really fast.
Right.
Because you're already not feeling good in the middle of it, right?
Right.
And in your case, look, you were, taking your nap for
Sure.
14 days, right? So,
Yeah,
So, you just know what you've been told, right, during those 14 days. So things can get real, you can forget and things become unclear. the longer that you wait. So to me, I'm glad it's on paper. As difficult as the journey was, I'm glad it's on paper because we have the facts, that we don't forget the facts in the miracle, along the journey of the miracle.
And there were so many things in it, in this process beyond just editing. I mean, oh my gosh. I won't even go
Learning
into
curve.
all the things that you've had to do and the research behind the scenes on how to, we had to build a website. We had to, which we had, we've done that before and worked with our son Adam in that process. But
no, our son Adam built the website.
yeah, he did. And,
he would ask us questions,
Sure.
we would answer, but
Sure.
he did all of that work. So I had no idea. And, everything from even, I knew in the beginning, I remember I said to you, this is going to be a huge deal.
Yeah.
Like, this is a big, big commitment. And you're like, well, I'm just writing. And I'm like, no, like, I'm the administrator, right? So my nature, right, is that to administrate, to put the plan out. So I knew there was going to be a bunch of details, a bunch. And
formatting.
Oh, yes.
Just
formatting.
the ISBN. How do you get that? How do
exactly.
you,
So I know all
the
these things have to
QRC.
happen, but I had never done them before. So, wow, it's been a big learning curve for me, but fun in the fact that it was fun to learn it. Not necessarily fun when you're going through it,
Right.
but and you're stressing about time frames. But it is like, I love it that I've learned how to do all of that. Like, that's really cool information, So it's not, I don't want to say that it's not difficult. It can be a little difficult and a little tedious, but
not impossible.
it's not impossible. No, it isn't. And I think of all the people that have stories in them that need to be told, things that people need to hear, and yet, they don't jump out there and do it because it is difficult, but it's not too difficult. You can do it. You can do it. Get out there and believe and dream, and anything is possible.
Well, and I think when you're trying something new, it's so important to ask for help.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Other people that have giftings and abilities that you don't possess. A lot of times in my personality, I won't try something new unless I feel like I can take care of it all the way through. But in my older years, get a little time under your belt and you realize that you're going to be really confined if you're only counting on you. Mm-hmm. And so I've learned to network and reach out to people, and my first thought was you on editing. And
I laughed when you said why that, because my students, I just couldn't let anything go without marking it. Or even correcting them when they were speaking. I don't know why. I'm just obsessed, and I used to edit the Sentinel for fun. When I'm reading the Sentinel, I get my red pen and even edit the Sentinel. It's just in me. And so I know Adam mentioned, Mrs. Henderson always corrected our papers and things.
Yeah.
And so,
Josh even told us the same thing. Good luck, Dad.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe they remember something.
But I knew I needed that, and I'll be honest with you, that stirred a lot of fear in me, because it took me, right? It took me all the way back to the reason I quit writing to begin with, which was a high school teacher who I just knew I had this term paper that was a A+++, and I got a C-, and red marks everywhere, and punctuation and grammar and issues all the way through it. And I'm like, did you even read the paper? What I said was amazing. Are you crazy? And from that time on, I never wrote. And so having a teacher, an educator that
high school teacher
that I had been told she's really tough, and I was like, no, I need that because I want this to be.
It's the only way we get better.
Yeah, I wanted the work to be worthy of all the time and the investment, and I felt like it needs to be out there. So
I mean, look, I graduated, we graduated 40 years ago.
right,
This is our 40th, anniversary of being graduated. So it's been a long time since we've sat in a classroom and had any grammar teaching. You know what I
Right.
mean? So after a while, you get lazy. 40 years, it's a long time to get lazy. And it was nice actually seeing and refreshing myself even on, with all of the corrections. I loved the why behind the corrections, not just, okay, there's a mark there, I have to fix it. I enjoyed really finding out why that is to make me even a better writer, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, I know sometimes I would write the reason why.
Yeah,
like the
and I
subject and
loved
verb
that.
need to agree
Loved that.
here.
helped us
Yeah.
so much.
Whatever, but
And
help me remember, not just, change that, but to look for it even as I'm reading through. And I found some things that none of us had caught, and I found some things I remember texting you and saying,
yeah.
look, shouldn't this be this? And you're like, good job.
Yes.
You did it, and it was nice because I had the whys behind it. And it really was helpful.
And I'm certain, without any doubt, that there are probably still a few
Oh,
flaws
yes.
that people are
Oh,
going to
yes.
find.
People
If you
can
get the
still
book-
reword it better.
Right,
Please don't
Absolutely.
judge us.
Right.
But that's not, it doesn't have
Yes.
to be perfect.
Yes.
The
because
message is
story-
perfect.
Yes, the
The
story,
story
is
is
so much more
perfect.
important. Yep.
So let's talk about the story. I want to hear from you on this. When you were editing, of course, you knew, being a member of the congregation, that God had brought a miracle, but this is really the first time that you were able to read and know the details behind the miracle.
Yes, because you had kept that fairly private.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Except the first Sunday, when you did share your story through online, we got to hear a lot of it.
Yes.
And we, just captivated and glued to the TV listening. We were so anxious to hear the story because we'd been praying for you so fervently and just following whatever text you could share. And so now we were finally going to get to hear it. But getting to read this book took it to a whole new level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially the first two edits, I didn't get to thoroughly enjoy it. I knew what was in it, but just couldn't just
Sure.
really soak it all in. So when I asked you for the last manuscript that we had edited to read it straight through last week before today's podcast, it only took 6 hours, not one mark. I just sat and just felt like I was
Finally.
relishing in getting to read this story from front cover to back cover, uninterrupted. And it was so captivating. And I really sensed the power of God, and that he still performs miracles today. And that in one of your chapters, you talk about the same God that parted the Red Sea,
Yes.
Yeah.
the same God that saved Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the fire, for the furnace, and the same God that released Peter from the shackles, knowing he was going to die the next day from prison with 16 guards. That the same God
Yeah.
came into your hospital room and did a turnaround,
Yes.
a miracle, the same kind of miracles today. And that really became so strong to me this third time reading it, that I could actually just take it in and really think about that and the miracle of that.
Yeah. What was
Ugh.
the hardest part to read for you? Or
There were probably 4 chapters that were the hardest for me
Really?
to read. And I even texted you after the first 2. I said, Mark, I can't even keep reading. I'm I'm sitting here, my eyes are so full of tears I can't even read the page. And that was when you were first, and you got into it fairly quickly to start talking about your ICU experience in chapter 4 already. And the awe and the shock that you went in at 1:00 in an ambulance to Kaiser, and in 11 hours you thought you were dehydrated,
Yeah.
even though you were so sick at that point with high fever and just ached and pain. And from 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you found yourself in ICU on a ventilator within 11 hours.
Yeah.
You were critical when you went in and thinking you were just
Didn't know it.
dehydrated, and reading those events and the doctors communicating with Tammy and the family that, you know, he's got pneumonia. He's critical. He is not just dehydrated. We have got to
Yeah.
intervene immediately.
I think
And
that
those
was
two-
the
oh.
first shock for me, was that he even had pneumonia.
Right.
Like, I was home coughing up a lung, right? He wasn't coughing. So it was so much of a shock to me. But I guess because he wasn't coughing, right, all of that was settling in his lungs. And that was the first shock for me. We thought, like I said, you know, he was dehydrated. So yeah, it was like one shock after another. Then, you know, a phone call a few minutes later, and a phone call an hour later, and another, you know, it just kept progressively getting, every time I'm like, what is that? As a matter of fact, at one point, and I think this is in the book, I even had texted him and said, what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
Like, what's happening? Like, stop the world. You know, this is going really like off the cliff really fast. And I'm not prepared for this. Like,
Right,
you were supposed to get some fluids and come home, you know, type thing. So it was a shocker.
And not to be able to be there, to me, I just through this whole book, I'm thinking, Mark, he's there alone.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah. But it was.
Yeah, and I think that was the part all the way through the process. That's one of the most difficult things, was that I had no advocate. I had, usually when you're ill and you're in the hospital, you have a family member that and this is no shot against Kaiser. Kaiser did an amazing job with me and working through it. We got to remember, this was brand new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
very
had
beginning
no
of COVID.
idea the protocol that should be in place. They were still learning about the disease. They were learning about this virus and how it could pass. And, you know, I later on, in retrospect, I was able to look back and reflect how hard it had to be for those doctors. Many of them and the nurses had not seen their family. They were being put up in hotel rooms, various things. They had not seen their children except for by Zoom, things like that, you know, we forget that this was brand new.
Yeah, and they even felt helpless. Like, well, how do we help these patients?
Right.
Yeah.
It was
Right.
trial and error a lot at that point. Well, even you talk before the chapter 4,
Yes.
when you had to go in for your pacemaker, and no sanitation, even though COVID had just begun, but people were in and out of elevators.
But it wasn't there was some, but the protocol wasn't all in place, because when I had to go in, being called in an emergency, my heart just started going haywire. When I was called in for that, it was just very shortly, like a week after, you know, the shutdown in Fresno, right? The shelter in place orders. It was just a little over a week since that. So it was so brand new. No one knew what it really, really could do and how fast. You know, we knew it was taking off fast, but you didn't have the huge numbers yet because we were just into it. So yeah, it was new.
It was,
A lot of protocols weren't in place yet.
and in writing, it was my heart to try to captivate and put into words, not just from my perspective, but things that you were feeling, the doctors were feeling, the atmosphere, just the chaos that the world was going through, and then to bring it home.
Yeah.
And it's so real. And, you know, I think a lot of times when something like COVID, nothing like COVID has hit in my lifetime, but I think we can get so caught up in the thought, well, that's over there and that's them. But man, when it hits home,
Yes.
and the reality of that, and just having to, I couldn't remember when I went on the vent, not only did I not have an advocate, but I couldn't communicate. I couldn't say anything, because you talked about a nap. Well, I was put in a medically induced coma. That's what you were referring to. And so I have a span there, and that was difficult writing about because I had a span where I was out, and I don't know. I woke up thinking I'd been there a couple of days and realized I'd been there like 12, 13, 14 days. And when that reality hit, I was like, I struggled for months after that with the loss of that time. And when I would ask after coming off the vent, I would ask doctors and I would ask nurses what was going on, and they wouldn't tell me.
I said, you don't want to know.
You don't
I
want to
think
know.
you
And I'm
said
like,
that.
no, I do want to know. I'm the guy that's like, hey, I need to know what happened. It's my body. It's what happened, but
Yeah.
they couldn't.
And part of that chapter 4 and 5 that was so difficult to read was talking about you having to be put in the prone position on your stomach for 16 hours
At a time,
at a
yeah.
time, and then maybe just a couple hours on your back, and then back on your stomach for 16 hours. And you share about how you don't sleep on your stomach. So how difficult you fought, even being in a coma, you fought which way to turn your head to sleep.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then your fever between 100 and 103, and the
Being packed in ice
Just-
and
just-
the whole,
it-
yeah.
and you'd lost 35 pounds by that point. You were sick at home and not eating right, and then in the hospital to lose 35 pounds.
In a month.
And
Yeah.
just your
It was
reading
shocking
it was
seeing
shocking.
him.
Like, how
It
can
was.
anyone go through this?
I remember when he came home and had lost that 35 pounds, it was like, wow. It was just shocking. It was really shocking for him to be so petite.
Yeah,
You know, it was just,
frail and so
Yeah.
frail and weak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really,
And then to read about, I'm trying to think what chapter your nightmares are in, but I'm going to read one sentence here that you have in your book that just, I love the wording, and I didn't change a thing about this one. This was chapter 5. So you'd been on the vent for 8 days, and the doctor calls and tells you that Mark's in multiple organ failure and everything's shutting down. And here's what you said. I had, in essence, become a total vegetable drowning in a sea of deadly bacteria that had no way of exiting my body. I was just waiting to die.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's another tissue. And that's just one of
we kinda
many,
messed up not having tissues in here.
many.
today.
But that kind of figurative language, that kind of, you wanted to be raw and real, and you nailed it. You nailed it. You were vulnerable, and you talked about vulnerability a lot in your book and how hard that has been in your life. And I think for most of us to be honest and vulnerable,
Yeah.
that we put on these happy, shiny little faces when inside we're breaking.
Yeah.
And we don't want anyone to know that. But you talk very honestly and openly about your past and things that hurt you, that affected your recovery, and coming home and dealing with those emotions, to be like post-traumatic stress disorder and dealing with that, and just the genuineness and heartfelt words that you shared in that book, and what you had to go through. It was very difficult to read, to answer your question. I'm
Well,
so-
when
so
I
glad.
when I started to write, I did something, I'd never done this before, and somebody told me, put out a questionnaire. And so that's what I did, and I questioned people from every walk of life imaginable, Christian, non-Christian, some that didn't even believe in God, still don't. Younger millennials, all the way to the elderly, all the way to every ethnicity and every geographic location I could find, all the way from Australia to Eastern United States, the Midwest, here in California, everybody I could think of as a cross piece, a cross section, because I wanted this book to appeal to everybody. And I think, I'm hopeful, we'll find out, but I think I was able to achieve that and reach it. But the one common thing that kept coming back was keep it real and keep it raw. And I was like, okay, that means I got to be really vulnerable, and I've got to really share some things that are very uncomfortable to share. And I think my favorite part of the book for me personally was a chapter or a section that I did when faith and humanity collide.
Yes.
Because being a man of faith and being in ministry for 30 some odd years, and now here I am fighting for my life, and my humanity was getting in the way, and I couldn't fight. I was so overwhelmed and fear, and all I was faced with was negativity, and I knew that you can tell in the doctors and in the nurses when they're just saying things that are trying to appease you and not alarm you, but you know this is not good. This is really bad. And I would lay there in the pain and the loneliness and everything humanly that I could feel was colliding with my faith. And I wanted people to know that it's okay when your faith and your humanity collide. And, you know, it's sort of like the guy in the Bible that said, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. Can you have belief and unbelief at the same time? Can you have fear and faith? Can they coexist? And so in the midst of all of this, it messed with my theology that I had developed over the years, hearing preachers preach that hadn't necessarily really lived through it, right? And it connected me with my humanity in a way that I had to wrestle through that and through that process. And I would try to be positive and faith laying there. By this time, I was still on the ventilator, but I had woke up, and I didn't know the miracle that alone was.
And that was on your 10th day on the bed.
Yeah, so I still had like 3.5, 4 days that I was awake, and I felt all this stuff, and yet thinking any minute I was going to die, and actually being in such pain that I literally prayed prayers trying to cut deals with God. Let me die. I can't live this way. I don't want to. And it's all in there in a way that, at the risk of this sounding really as a man that lacked faith in the process, I think what it did was it lifted me to a place of wrestling with humanity and the reality of my faith and helping them merge together. And I think I went through all of that to be able to help other people, because we all struggle with our humanity and our feelings and our emotions. And so I was hopeful to be able to bring out not just the story and the play-by-play and, you know, day by day, but really the lessons learned and the things that God taught me in the midst of doing the miracle and performing this miracle in a way. He did so much collectively inside me. So I hope
really
that comes
liked
out.
You writing that chapter when faith and humanity collide, because I think hopefully, you know, our hope is that it will help someone realize that just because your faith and humanity are colliding doesn't mean God's not going to move. You know what I'm saying? Like your struggle doesn't make God look at you and say, oh, not enough faith, and walk away.
Never.
You know, and I think that's what people really struggle with, is they feel like they can't be real, like God doesn't really know what you're really dealing with inside anyway, but they're afraid to verbalize it. They're afraid to say, you know, this is what my struggle is right now, on, you know, just being really afraid that God's going to not hear them because they're not in faith. And I think
And being
that's
afraid
really important.
that other believers will judge them
Yes.
for being that
Yep.
authentic and that real.
And unfortunately, a lot of other believers do.
Yeah,
So, I hope this is a lesson also to those who would judge.
absolutely.
That they shouldn't be judging. God didn't even judge.
I mean, you even
You know.
talk about the scripture where God wants to hear our cries. He
Yes.
desires to hear
Yes.
our cries
Yeah,
and our moanings.
Yep.
He wants to meet us there.
Yep.
he's sensitive. He said, "My ear is inclined to your cry."
Yep.
And I think that really shows the character, the nature of God. Um, it cancels that argument that God is up there ready to be judge and jury and to chastise us because we don't perform or we're not at the right
Right.
level, right, of faith or whatever it is. And that's so not God. That is so not in his character. He loves us. He
Yes.
works with us. Shoot, on my best day, I don't measure up. So, it's like, man, that's the character and nature of God, the unconditional love that he says,
Yeah.
you're my son, you're my daughter. I care about you right where you are, not because of how you perform. And as a performance-driven person most of my life, that was so comforting to know that I couldn't perform. I didn't even want to. And yet he loved me in the middle of it anyway and heard the cry of thousands and thousands of people calling out my name and praying for me, which was a miracle in and of itself. So,
Speaking of you were talking about this is why you wanted to write the book. I wanted to make sure that, that people understood. It was really important to me. We were looking for a subtitle. I'm Not Done could be a myriad of things. So we needed to narrow it down a little bit. And we discussed what are we going to say as a subtitle to give people a little more information, right?
Right.
And it was really important to me that we didn't leave it medical because this book is not about Mark was healed from an illness.
yeah.
This is about having no hope. And when, because boy, until you've heard those words, right, and the doctor tells you, listen, you might as well just understand this is where we're going, right? And just digging in your heels and saying, no, this is not going to happen. It was really important to me that this didn't become just a medical healing,
Right.
but that it really was an answer to hope and an answer to having no hope, right? Being able to give hope to someone. And so my thing is I said, I really like when there is no hope, but God says live, because it wasn't about COVID, right? Maybe in your case, that specific time, but how many times in our life were we dying in another area? It could be financially, it could be medically, it could be your marriage, it could be, your children. Maybe you have children that have lost their way and you're so distraught about them. Maybe it's anxiety and you feel like you will have to live with this forever or it's going to be the death of you.
Right.
In
Right.
those terms, right? It's going to be the death of you. Maybe not physically, but mentally.
You were hurt, you were
Yes,
betrayed.
So yes. And when you feel like there is no hope, no matter if the enemy is whispering that to you, or that's where it's going to originate regardless. But when you feel that, I want someone to be able to read this and say, wait, God's not done with me. And just because the world or the enemy or other people are telling me there's no hope, it's God that makes the determination. When he says live, everything changes.
Right.
So we focus to him and we, turn our cry to him and not let it become internal and give up.
Right.
And that was really important to me, is that this goes beyond a story of COVID, but that it goes to any hopeless situation, no matter where people find themselves.
Right. Right.
that let God speak over you. Listen for him. Listen to what he says. He gives you so much in his word to hold on to, right? And we have hope, and that anchors our soul, the word says. So, just don't lock in. I just would ask everyone not to lock in to it being a story about COVID. A lot of us are sick of hearing about COVID, right? But this is something that's worth listening to, because it will speak not just to your physical body, but every aspect of
arena
your life.
Yeah.
Every aspect, no matter what it is, this can apply to it.
Tim, I've often taught truth is parallel,
Yes.
and spiritual truth is parallel, meaning this: Jesus said, you'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free, right? Truth is kingdom truth. It's God's truth. There's facts that surround us, but the truth overrides whatever facts we're seeing. And the truth of principles you can apply in every arena of your life.
Yep.
He also says, I came to give you life, and that more abundantly. And so the subtitle, when there's no hope, it transcends sickness. It could be there's no hope for your marriage.
Yep.
No hope for your money.
Yep.
Your accountant may be telling you you're bankrupt. There's no hope in your
But
future.
if God says live,
A relationship, anything. But
changes.
when God
Yeah.
breathes life into it,
Yep.
God says live, and he will breathe into it. The back of the book says this: have you ever felt hopeless or helpless in an impossible situation? Have you ever wondered whether God hears your prayers? Have you ever asked the question, where are you, God? If so, this story's for you.
Yes.
And we wrote that. Really, we believe that
Yes.
this
Absolutely.
will transcend. It's not just about sickness, like you say, and certainly not just about COVID. A lot of stuff about COVID in there, a lot of things we learned along the way, but the fact is that it supersedes all of that.
So reading this so many times, Shelley, how do you feel about those statements? Do you feel like this book accomplishes
Absolutely.
that?
Absolutely. And I remember filling out your questionnaire, what I would hope to see in a book that you would write. And one of my statements was, don't make it too techy. Don't don't get too, into medical terms that would drag the reader down. And you do just enough to explain what you needed to know to understand what was happening with you, but anybody could understand
Yeah.
Right.
the verbiage and what your intent was. And if you talked about COVID cement, I had never heard that term before. That was an important term to understand, that the urgency of having to put you on the ventilator and the doctors calling you and saying, you have to tell us right now, can we put Mark on the vent?
Yes.
And you're feeling like, how can I make this decision?
Yeah,
Mark, this
overwhelming.
is because of
Yeah.
what you'd heard, that most people didn't come off the vent in those early days. But how you explain, it's like a paint that covers the, how do you say,
It's like the alveoli.
alveoli. It covers that like a paint, and the longer you go, the thicker that paint becomes.
More layers and more layers.
And hardened, and they can't put the tube into your
And I didn't know
lungs,
that
and so it
when
was
they called. It was later I
right.
found that, I heard somebody say that, and I was like, well, I've never heard that term. And then I actually stumbled on something through Facebook. I actually
explained that
stumbled onto something from a doctor that explained that. And I was like, oh,
That makes
that
sense.
would have
the
been helpful to
urgency.
know.
Yeah.
And
Right
later
back
on, we
then,
go
yeah.
back and confirm that.
Yes.
And dug out articles and
Yep.
various things to lend the credibility, because
Yes.
we didn't want to put that terminology
Sure.
in there just off somebody on Facebook.
Yeah, you even called your one of your
Yes.
nurses to
Yes.
get clarification.
Yep.
And then I'm picturing this. The imagery is so real as you read this, and I'm picturing you on the phone with this call from the doctor, Mark, 11 hours after he's going into the hospital with, you think is just dehydration, to ask you, can we put him on the vent? You said, I cannot make this decision. Mark needs to be part of this decision. And you
Oh,
didn't
my
know he
gosh.
was listening
Yeah,
to
I
the
had no
whole
idea that
phone
he was there. I
call.
was so glad that he was there. The doctor didn't say anything about, I have Mark here.
Ugh.
He just said,
And-
listen, we've got to make a decision, and I need you to, make that. And I'm. Plus, remember too, I was so sick myself
Yes, at that point.
that, and if you've ever had COVID, you understand that it really messes with your mind as well. Like you can't think clear. It's really foggy when you have a stronger case like what we had. Okay. So that's one of the things that you just can't think, and your head hurts so badly. I remember headaches that felt like my head was just going to explode off the top of my head or the front of my face. It just was excruciating. And in that,
Ugh.
I get this phone call, and I have to try to muddle my way through this, and just, was so. I just remember sitting there at the desk just like this, and just like, God help me, like, how do I make this kind of a decision? And I just was honest with the doctor. I'm just like, I need to talk to Mark. Like, what does he think about this? Tell me, what does he think? He said, well, Mark is, here. And I'm like, babe, what do you think? What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? I'll honor whatever you tell me. And he just began to cry
Yes.
and said, I don't have a choice. And he cried and cried and cried. And I was just like, okay, then do it. Like,
And knowing that may be the last
Yeah,
time
time
you
that we get
talked
to
to
speak.
each other.
Well,
but
when
you
I-
knew
Honestly,
the stats
that
were 1
didn't-
to 2%.
yeah, but that didn't even really register. Like, that's how
In you.
sick I was. Yeah,
it
in-
did in me.
right. And maybe
That's
in
why
you,
I
yeah,
was
but in
crying. I
me,
was like,
I was overwhelmed with the decision, but not thinking this could literally.
Yeah.
I didn't even say. I don't even remember if I told you I loved you at that.
yeah.
I
we
usually
exchanged
do. I
and that was
rarely.
the last time we spoke until you were talking FaceTime after
Yeah.
I had woke up out of the coma.
I mean, I just kept even thinking like, what are the boys gonna say? That was my main thing. Not this might be the last time that I see him, but what are the boys gonna say? Because I can't even involve them. I can't.
And it was
I have to make a decision right this second,
yeah.
and
And it was tough
it
for
was urgent. So,
for our family because
yeah,
what do you mean you already made this decision?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you don't understand. We didn't have a choice.
Yeah, they didn't even know he was in ICU yet. It
No,
happened
no,
so quickly. You were
no.
going to let him know the next day.
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
it was so late, especially for
Yeah.
Kyle being in
yeah, it was
Tennessee.
really late. Yes,
that-
exactly.
and then all this takes place
Yeah,
before
like,
that.
it was
a lot.
crazy.
So, shift gears a minute to later on in the book, where the good stuff starts happening.
All right, can I share one more
Sure,
one more thing that I
absolutely.
think I So chapter 4 and 5 were very difficult. Then you add some things in there that kind of okay,
Let you breathe again.
breathe. Okay, I can keep reading. Okay, this is a little bit lighter. I can read this. And then when you get to chapter 10 and 11, so I needed the tissue box again. And that is where you go into detail about 2 horrific nightmares that keep occurring even though you're unconscious. And it was those nightmares reflected what you were going through and feeling, even though you were in a coma, with the high fevers that were just, you were burning up and dreaming. I won't go into a lot of detail, but being on fire and no one seeming to come to your aid or wanting to help you. And you go into great detail about this horrific nightmare that was so real to you. And then with your lungs being filled with fluids and having pneumonia and the difficulty of breathing and being prone and all that. The other dream about being on a ship and being thrown overboard and drowning and pleading for help, and the people on the boat are laughing at you and ignoring your pleas for help. And for those to keep, you were afraid to, later you said you were afraid to go to sleep because you even had those after you woke up, and the torment of those nightmares, even when you came home, how to let go of those gripping nightmares, to relive being so tormented with the fevers and the pneumonia and all that, and the time that you finally did wake up,
Mm-hmm.
and I think your nose was itching, and so
Yeah.
you tried to go scratch your nose, and you looked down like, why can't I scratch my nose? And for the first time, you look down and your wrists are restrained.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look down and your other wrist is restrained. I mean, I was shocked. I had not heard any of this before.
Yeah.
On top of everything else you shared with us, now you are in this bed with a ventilator, a feeding tube. You don't know where you are, why you're here. You have no recollection. And then you look down and also your ankles are tied down.
Yeah.
Mark, I tried to fathom.
And I'm naked except for a loincloth.
A towel across you because of the fever. They were trying to cool your body temperature down. I don't know how any human can face that, something that horrific.
Yeah. So you go to sleep,
Oh,
fully clothed. The last thing I remember is talking to you on the phone. Shortly thereafter, they sedate me, do what they have to do, and I'm gone. I'm out of it for all that time. And then I go to sleep one way, and when I woke up, as you said, I described
Yes.
being
Oh.
tied down, stripped naked,
Yeah.
this tube in my throat, excruciating pain, and laying there looking around in a room by myself.
Yes.
And in walks somebody that looks like, because by this time, 10 days later, protocol had changed
They've
in the
learned a
hospital.
lot. Uh-huh.
And now they're not just wearing a mask, they're in full shield and all the images that we've now become accustomed to. But at that time, and when I woke up alone and in that scenario, and then these guys look like they're from outer space walking in, you know, or some sort of lab that they've put me in. My mind's going crazy, and yeah, I was able in the book to really describe the details of that, because that one moment was probably the most traumatic thing of my life. And it did. Even after I came home, I had to deal with nightmares, the same two reoccurring nightmares, and then the fear, the terror of waking up, being back in the hospital,
Yes.
and I would have flashbacks. And so I had to go through some EMDR therapy and really help me with that. And a lot of people that deal with post-traumatic, when you experience that level of trauma, things get embedded in your mind, and it's hard to function. The mind is so complex. And I talk about that too, and try to reduce the stigma around
Yes.
mental illness, because it's a form of mental illness and challenges, and go into therapy. And it's okay to go to a therapist. I thank God I did. And my therapist, it was so cool because he actually told me, write.
Oh.
And he didn't know I was writing a book. He said, you need to journal, you need to get this out. And I found this book very therapeutic as I was writing it, and particularly about those chapters, to go into detail. And he encouraged me in the writing, go into the detail. And not knowing I was writing a book, but he said, in great detail, nobody else is ever going to read it. And I said, well, actually, they probably will, or at least hopefully they will. Yeah. And he talked about how that was going to help me. And do you know, after I wrote it, I never had another nightmare, and I never had another panic attack where I woke up in the middle of the night. You remember that.
You would
and
wake
couldn't
up
breathe
and just and you know and be gasping, and of course, you know, I'm just like up in a flash, and I'm like, what's the matter? Are you okay? Are you okay? Or I would listen for him to breathe in the night. Like, just, you know, it was like traumatic for both of us, in the fact that even when he wasn't having the gasping and all of that, which was very frequent, if I didn't hear, I would lay there and listen for him to breathe. If I didn't hear him breathing deep enough, I would wake him up. Babe, I need you to breathe. I need you to take some big, deep breaths. And it was very, very difficult. So
of course, I'm still on oxygen.
You're right. You're still
Yeah.
on pretty high levels of
and
oxygen.
everything. Yeah, when I
Mhm.
first came home. So,
Yes.
so turn the corner with me, and what part of the book stands out to you that brought? Because I don't want everybody to be thinking all I'm going to do is cry all the way through. Who wants to read that? Maybe
I
know,
do.
if I'm depressed or whatever. But obviously, it ends well, right?
Yeah, I'm the person that's like not the thing. I don't want to
Yeah.
necessarily sit and cry while I'm reading a book. But to preempting going into what you're going to talk about, I think the really most wonderful parts to me, because there were some parts that were very difficult, obviously, for me to read too. But the thing that I love about the book is that he doesn't leave you there. God doesn't leave you there.
Yeah.
Right? He's so gracious and he's so wonderful. And he really is our comfort. He really is our, our salvation, our comfort, our joy, our strong tower, right? He's where we can run into. And as Mark would run into, and honestly, even when Mark was out of it and couldn't run into, he was there. And I love how all of that is unfolded and, put into place here to know that God doesn't leave you there. He always comes. He always rescues, whether he comes himself, Jesus, in bodily form, right? Or an angel, or it, however it is, he is always there, always.
Yeah.
And I love that, even to the point of when you were tied down, right? When restrained. I really should say restrained because
They
not that
weren't-
the
they
hospital
weren't
tied
any-
you down,
right.
right? But when you're
and
restrained,
the restraint was to keep me from
yes, it was
subconsciously
needed. It was
grabbing
definitely
the,
needed.
Yeah.
the
Yes.
tube.
The tube
that-
and pulling it out because you would have died.
I would
yes.
have killed myself.
So that's, and you wouldn't even realize what you're
Sure.
doing. So yes, it was needed. There's nothing wrong with what they had done at the hospital. But when you are in that trauma as you wake up and find yourself in this way,
Right.
having no idea why you're there, what happened,
Sure.
how did you go from being on a phone call with me to this? You're in a completely different room. But how God even sends a special nurse in
Yes. At
to
just the
answer
right time.
every question you had.
She read
And
your
yet-
mind.
She
She knew.
did.
Seriously,
She
like
knew.
it was like God
obviously-
just placed in her the desire to give him the answers and to touch his arm,
Yeah.
just give him some human touch. And, that's something I had been praying for when I was at home. God, please send someone into that room. Send someone into that room to touch him and to tell him it's going to be okay, to give him hope because there's hope. There's a lack of hope all around him. Can you send someone in? And to know that God, sent her in and sent an angel in the room. And just, I love that. Like, God does not leave us. He
Right.
doesn't leave us in the mess.
Thank God.
Yes. So that's a
and
beautiful
very-
part of the book and definitely the highlight of, just watching God's hand move because when you're in the middle of it, you don't understand,
Yeah.
what's happening.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, you looked and, we can look and say, wow, God's all over this story. He's all over this story in his faithfulness.
Two things I want to say, and then I want to hear some final thoughts from you, Shelley, on the turn of this. The very nature of a miracle is when all hope is gone.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about miracles. Everybody wants a miracle, but nobody wants to be in a position where all hope is gone.
Yes. Yeah.
And so my idea in the book was to paint how hopeless it was,
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't get any more hopeless than that situation. And then to turn the corner and to show how God does the miracle.
Yeah.
And, I want to just share, not just from the table of contents, that, part one of the book, the first 3 chapters are about COVID hitting home. And then part 2 is all about it can't be happening. This can't be happening. And it's all about being on the vent and you through this and my family and the church and
Everything
everything.
just turned to chaos.
Yeah, and the details of all of that. And then part 3 begins, the miracle begins.
Yeah.
And I start talking about how the prayer rally, the prayer call, the call to arms,
Yeah.
swords up, hashtag swords up, became a battle cry that we had no idea it would go across the
Yeah.
world. And literally, what was it, 47 states and 20 countries, something like that,
I think 43 states and 22 countries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that were represented in 20,000 people praying. And the amazing thing is, still today, just the other day, we were at a wedding, and some people were there from Washington State
Crazy.
who we'd never met and walked up and said, "Are you Pastor Mark and Tammy?" "Yeah, I wanted to meet you. We prayed for you." We were in Outback in another city, and a woman walks up to me and says, "Are you the guy that was on TV?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said that the miracle, you overcame COVID. Yeah, that's me. And she said, "We were praying for you, our whole church." And so it's humbling.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And it's mind-boggling that cry, God knew that many people needed to be coming together to fill those bowls of prayer in heaven so that the miracle could be poured out.
And
the
I
book
had no
tells
idea. When I put that out, right, on Facebook, I honestly, like Mark and I were talking about it last night, and I just started crying last night thinking about it because I distinctly remember putting that post out. And honestly, I had no idea that 20,000 plus people would respond and actually tell us we're praying, not us assume it. I mean, like literally tell us and give us their locations. And I was telling Mark last night, I said, that map laid on our kitchen table on that board, and Amanda and I put every one of those pins in. And I remember us saying, how in the world am I going to put another pin in over here? Like there is no room. And us laughing and just thinking, how is this happening?
Yeah.
20 countries?
Yeah. Entire churches
wow.
and prayer organizations were
Yeah.
praying. And I mean, major ministry prayers were going out, and we didn't even know it.
I
And
just thought,
it's just- yeah.
I put it on Facebook, and our church
Yeah.
would, pray because
Yeah.
we were all homebound, at that time on, shelter in place mandates. So I just figured this is a good way to get it to the body to start praying. And, we're known in the community. We've been here 25 years. So, and served in so many different capacities that a lot of people know you. So I was like, I'll get it to the community, and those that are believers will start praying.
Sure.
And I just had no idea it was going to spread like that. But God knew.
Amen. Amen.
And I have got to interject because
Oh, that's great.
I think, honestly, after reading this whole book 3 times, to me, one of the most powerful parts is you.
Yeah. Amen.
When I read it, I had to read the sentence 3 times the first time. I said,
She did
because
what?
I'm when the doctor the second time calls
Yep.
and asks you to gather the family on the phone from all over where they live in the middle of the night, I think it was.
No,
or was
that
was the
was in the
second
day.
the second
Yeah.
call was in the day. Okay. So you call Kyle in Tennessee, get all the kids on the phone.
Yep.
And this doctor relays the final news to you that multi-organ failure,
Yes.
his kidneys aren't working, his liver's not functioning.
Yes.
His heart is having to beat so hard, try to beat so hard to process the blood and all the poisons that are in his system, that if he doesn't die of COVID, he's going to die of a heart attack. And there's no hope.
Yep.
He gives you this horrific news. Your kids are on the phone. You guys are crying. And what comes out of your mouth next is beyond me. And it's only God that, I mean, your faith is so strong. You didn't want to hear those words, and you weren't going to accept those words. And I exactly, you said, just tell me what has to happen for him to come off the vent.
Yep.
And that blew me away, Tammy.
Well,
It
in
blew me
fairness, there
away
there
that
was other conversation in there, right?
Yes, but
But when it all came down to it, it's like
you,
I was tired. I remember saying, "What are you going to do then?" Because he can't lay there and just have a heart attack. What are you going to do? You don't understand. We've done everything that we can do. We've given him everything we can give him. Nothing is working. And I'm like, but just, the last couple of days, his numbers look a little bit better. And he said, you don't understand you have to look at the whole story. You're only looking at a few numbers. And I'm like, but he was getting better. And he said, no, actually, to be honest with you, he's getting worse. And that blew my mind. Like, I just could not accept that. Like, no. And I said, you have to give me something.
yes.
Give me something. Give me a little win somewhere. And he said, I'm sorry. This is where
We've
we
done
are.
everything we
You
know how
have-
to at this
yes.
point.
You have
Everything.
to come to the realization of what you're facing. And at that point, I'm just like, okay, I can't do this anymore because I begged you to give us hope. You know what I mean? And it's nothing against the doctors.
No,
They have to
no.
tell you the reality,
These
right?
were the
That's their
facts
job
at the time.
to give you the reality. But I'm looking for the supernatural. And so I think it was honestly, I know it had to be anointing rising up. And I get that. But I think it was partly just out of frustration as well. Okay, then just tell me what do you need to hear to be able to tell me things are better? What do you need to hear? And so as he's telling me, I'm just writing to beat the band, man. I'm just writing all these things down. Okay, I've got my list of like 7 things. And all right, that's all I need to know.
That is how
That's
we're
it.
going to pray. That is
Yep.
the order we're going to pray things happen. And that's when you posted your swords up,
Yep.
where you really
Yes.
put out what's going on as much as you
Yes.
could before you were sheltering kind of
Yes.
what you guys were dealing with and going through.
Yeah,
And this
and-
was the plea that
Yes.
rallied the 20,000.
Yeah.
That's right. And it really was. Dr. Charles Dixon just gave us a review on the book because he and his wife Beryl read it. And he talked about divine warfare strategy.
Yeah.
And in the midst of something so hopeless, I believe what happened is even, my wife's amazing, but I believe the gift of faith rose up.
Yeah.
A real, true, supernatural faith rose up to say, just tell me what has to happen. And you took that strategically to prayer. And that became the turning point.
I didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
Like,
But
what? You were going to die.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't have a
But
choice.
But it was amazing.
Yeah. I
was
needed to know
amazing.
what needs to happen.
And all this while I'm taking a nap.
Yeah.
I have no idea that any of this has transpired or what's going on. So,
It's just, I mean, every page you just can hardly wait to turn and just keep reading and seeing what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next?
yeah. We've had several people that have said, I couldn't put it down. This is you need to, somebody said, I thought I set aside enough time that I would read it in segments. And they were like, I stayed up all night. I could not quit reading.
It's been a common thread that
Because
people have.
You left
told
me
us.
at the end of one chapter
Hanging on for the next.
hanging
Yeah.
for the next. And, that was my goal in the book. And kind of wrap up with this.
Nailed it.
But I wanted, I know this sounds crazy and I'm no Mel Gibson, but I remember when he was talking about the trauma of writing The Passion.
Oh.
He said, people said, and I was at an interview with him with several pastors, about
really?
100 pastors when the movie was first coming out. And I was there and I remember the question about it. after we watched it. We got to view the movie, and then Mel Gibson came out, and we were talking to him, and he actually said this. He said, "I had to give people reprieve from their emotions."
Yeah.
Because you get into something that intense, and you got to give people a reprieve, or they can't do it.
Yes,
they
and I
can't watch
appreciated
it.
that.
They can't read it.
Yeah.
And so that was my goal. But so I left myself. My attempt was, I'm going to leave you there, and let's talk about this, and try to get people engrossed in something else that would give them a reprieve.
Yes.
It was. And it was hard because I had to write about something that had to do with a lesson that you can learn or something else going on at that moment, but to kind of drill down on it a little bit, or to step aside for a moment, and then now back to the story. And I feel like I did a pretty good job of being able to do that and tell the detail without it being so overwhelming that you just can't do it anymore. And so that was my goal, at least, and in writing. And like I say, I learned a tremendous amount writing this book, and all of you and others that helped so much in producing this and publishing it, because we published it ourselves. I'm sorry, but I was not going to take something this important and real to me and give it to a publisher that would basically take all the rights to it and control it. And I don't know how they get away with this, but like 50 cents a book or $1 a book going back to the writer, and they keep everything that's there. And it just it's not okay with me. It's just something I didn't want to do. I know that it has its place, but I also, the biggest thing is I wanted to maintain control, because if I want to give away to people in missions, or what have you, then I want to be able to do that and not have a publisher controlling it.
Yes.
And the price point and everything else. And so we put it out, and it is, by the time everybody hears this, it will be here. We'll have our first 1,000 copies that are being printed right now.
And you just got this yesterday, June
Yeah,
16th.
just got it. It's very nice. Raised print on the front, the back of the book, and then all very well formatted, and very, very pleased with the product and how it came out. Where can people get this? Because we self-published, we're not on Amazon or any of that right now. We may be in the future, but right now they can only go to imnotdone.online.
Yes.
imnotdone.online, and they can order 1,000 copies from me. Yeah, it's great. And
what else I love?
Yep.
yes,
Tammy figured out how to get a QRC code here, and so you
Yes.
can just put your phone right up there. It takes people to your website.
Yep.
And what I'd hoped when I first said, why aren't there pictures in here? I want to see pictures of you in the hospital. But this takes people to your website where
Yep.
they can see the pictures and actual
Pictures and
video
video.
of you coming out of the hospital with hundreds of doctors and
Yes.
staff. And you were able to be there. They let you in for your going home
Yep.
in the wheelchair celebration with the posters and the cheers. And I mean, talk about emotional.
yeah.
And then to
Yeah.
come back to Dinuba and see
Yep.
your church family greet
And
you
there's
in the
a lot
parking
of-
lot. So you're going to get to
Yes.
see that.
Yes, you can
Which
see
is
that.
So
There's
amazing.
also a lot of other video on there as well. Even after Mark came home, all of it's after Mark came home, but when he came home, there were physical therapy, that he would have to do at home, and he would have to do, continue breathing treatments with the spirometer, doing exercises actually with the spirometer, and there was one particular Sunday morning. He came home on Thursday, and this was the next Sunday, just a couple of days later. And he was, using that spirometer, and he had been struggling for the like Saturdays and Sunday morning, struggling a little bit with his breathing again, and he was feeling a little bit down. And we were worshiping. We had our service, church service online, and we were watching the service, and the song that we were worshiping with, because we didn't have live worship on there at that point. We were just doing videos, right, from YouTube. And we were worshiping to You Came, right? And when it got to the point of You Are a Miracle Working God.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're a miracle working God. You came. I knew that you would come. You came. You didn't leave me here. I knew that you would come. And at that point, all of a sudden, I look over because I don't even realize what's happening. I'm worshiping, right? And in the video, you can hear worship blaring, in the background. And as I turned and looked at him, and he's frantically trying to find the spirometer. So he finally reaches it, and he looks at me and he says, "Get your camera." And I'm like, "Okay." He said, "Turn on the video." And I'm like, "Okay." And I'm thinking, I don't even know what's going on. We're trying to worship, right? So I turn it on him, and he starts doing that and breaks 4 records that he had set on the spirometer. And I knew he had been really struggling to breathe. And then he sets it down, and I'm like, yes. Like, he went from 1,500 up to, I think he went over 3,000 that day. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what in the world is happening? And he said, and he says this, you can see him say it on the video. He says, "God spoke to me and told me, stop saying you don't have enough breath. I told you I would teach you how to breathe. And I've put breath in you, so how can you not have enough? Now breathe."
And that week I went off oxygen.
He went off oxygen later that week. So it was amazing. And we caught that. He had the presence of mind to tell me, grab the, video this, to please turn it on quick. And I had no idea what had happened. Yeah. He was just worshiping and heard God say that. So there's video like that. There's, just interviews, all of the TV, interviews that people did. We have video for a lot of stuff. There's like a dozen videos on there.
Pictures of me on the vent.
Tons of
and
pictures.
Just how bad it was. And I think a picture speaks 1,000 words. Yeah. And so as people are reading the book, they can go and they can actually see. And every picture we have, we tell what page it correlates with.
Right.
So they know in the book where it is.
So as you're reading, when you go back and look at it, and you think, oh, yeah, where was that? I want to read that again after looking at the picture. Well, it's on there. Yeah. You can see where it is. So and it's really awesome.
Yeah, and what I love, too, is there were so many supernatural things, angels in the room speaking and preaching and declaring over me, and a couple of times that I believe I actually died because I could sense my spirit and felt my spirit leaving my body. And God literally spoke life into me in those situations. The encounters I had with God, there's a whole chapter on the encounters with God.
Amazing.
It's just wonderful, wonderful. But the most amazing thing is it's not limited to me.
Yeah.
He doesn't love me anymore just because I said I'm not done. It doesn't mean I'm more privileged than anybody else or more favored than anybody else. It's really knowing God has a destiny on my life and locking into that. And so there's a lot of stuff in the book that I believe is going to speak to a lot of people. I'm very hopeful. I'm real excited. We just put a post on Facebook last night, just in passing, coming soon, and a picture of the book. Good. And we had, by morning, we went to bed, and by morning we had, I don't know, way over 100 likes on it, and tons of people saying, of those, I can't wait, I want the book.
And I haven't even shared copies. It yet. He just put it on his.
And a fellow pastor this morning said, I want 50 copies.
Oh, my. I
So-
remember the first time we were at the kitchen table and we were talking about how many copies you should
Right.
order, and you said, "I think, well, I better start with 200."
Yeah,
I
right.
said, 200? You're gonna need more than 200. Let me tell you that. And so
Well,
it's just
financing
so
it out of pocket and this being our own investment, it was hard, but we found a good printer that would do a decent run and give us a decent price and everything. So
because
anyway.
you know what, and you're not faced the right direction.
yeah,
But we all have scars,
Yes.
and there's that scar on your cheek
yeah.
is a reminder every minute of the
Yes.
day the miracle God did for you and will do for others.
Yes.
And we may not have visible scars. We may have
Yes.
emotional scars, but we have a God that's bigger.
Yep.
amen,
And
amen.
I love seeing that scar. I know you maybe don't
I know.
aren't so happy
I write,
to
I
show
write
it,
about
but
that. It's hard to see it every day, but every day it serves as a reminder because that scar was from being prone and the tube coming out of my mouth and being on my face, and it bore a sore that was very deep. Actually, there are pictures of it all on the website, and I talk about it in there. But yeah, it's important. You know, Jesus was quick to show the disciples his scars.
Yeah.
He said, because this represents where I hurt for you
Mhm.
and what I went through for you. And so when I look at my scar, I say, yeah, it's a picture of where I've been, but it's also a picture of how God showed up. And so I want to wear that scar well.
Yeah. You know, when I look at that scar's not ugly to me. It's not ugly to me at all. It's actually beautiful. And I tell you why I say that, because that scar to me doesn't represent what COVID did. That scar represents to me the people whose lives have been touched since you got out of the hospital. How many people have asked you about that scar, and you've been able to minister to them and show them God's life-giving wonder and watch their reactions and them turn toward God. I remember one particular young man that had been away from God for a very long time, and he literally sat right there with you
That
and
is-
recommitted his life to
Yes.
Christ.
in a car
And
dealership.
that is what that scar reminds
I was
me.
buying my truck,
Yep.
and the guy who was selling it to me was backslidden away from the Lord, and I showed him that scar and told him my story, and he came back. To the
He
Lord
asked
right
about
there.
it.
Yeah,
He asked.
The
a
other
lot of
day I
people
was-
do ask, oh, man, what happened?
Yeah.
Because they think he was in an accident or something.
Yeah.
And you get to tell of the goodness of God.
yeah. The other day I
So
was
it's a beautiful thing to me.
getting your car smogged, and the guy that was smogging the vehicle asked about it,
Really,
and I was able to minister to
I
him.
love that.
And so I just say,
I
hey,
think
you
it's
know
great.
what? It opens doors.
Yep.
It's a conversational piece, and it serves as a reminder not of tough times, but the goodness of God.
Yep.
And it's all there. It's all in. I'm not done. I'm not done. Online.
Yes, go
The
to the
cost
website.
of the book is $17.99, and it'll be the best $18 you've
Yeah.
ever spent. Go, and I believe it'll be a blessing to you.
We'd
and a
love for you
blessing
to
to
see
other people.
the videos and the pictures that go with it, share in our world. And we loved it so much we even had some cups made.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Having cups made to go with. They're nice 14-ounce mugs. They're really good size.
It'd make a
Very
wonderful
good.
gift
Yes,
too.
Very good.
yes, it would be a great gift to give to someone. So
Hey, I've enjoyed speaking with you so much, Shelley. You've been such a blessing in this process, and we love you. I want to have you back sometime and talk about leadership and some of the things you taught to students. And I know my boys were profoundly impacted by their education, primarily you as a teacher. They all say you were their favorite, hands down, and they learned so much about life and leadership through your class. And so
Thank you.
we appreciate you so very
This
much. You
was
and
my
Mike are a
priv-
blessing.
And this was my privilege and joy, and thank you for asking me to be
Is there
part of your journey.
anything else, Shelley, in closing that you want to, one final thought? Anything you want to say?
I think in knowing you and reading this book, the importance of family.
Yeah.
And everyone has their place, their different talents, their different abilities. And instead of fighting each other, disagreeing how things should have been done, they all came together. And when you interviewed all your kids before writing this, to include a chapter about what they felt, what they experienced, how they coped, how they told their children, you talked about why don't we take time to have these talks before a crisis hits?
Right.
Why don't we take those times and moments to know our family and have discussions, to be real, to be raw, to be relevant, like this book is?
Yeah.
And that was a real takeaway for me, is life is short.
Yeah.
The more you can know about your loved ones and support them and encourage them and pray for them, the better. And I thought that was just a wonderful takeaway from your book. Yeah. Don't wait for a crisis.
Amen to that.
Start today.
Well, thanks so much, Shelley, for joining us. We love all of you that are watching and appreciate so very much you being a part of the podcast. Share it with your friends. Tell other people about not only I'm Not Done, but tell them about Real Talk. We want to keep it real and raw and relevant.